Hey guys, so I just finished filming the video for rock textures, and I thought it would be a cool idea to utilize some of those concepts in a finished drawing. At least not exactly the same types of rock textures, but more or less an example of how you could make a drawing with almost all rocks and make it interesting. So I've got this sketch that I whipped out real quick, just showing a landscape of mostly rocks. So I'm going to get started here and just talk as I go. So it's more or less just I got this like rock dome sticking up out of the ground, with a few large boulders sitting on top of it. And on top of one of these boulders is a person. But everything in this drawing is rock except for that person. I thought, yeah, it would just be something interesting, an interesting experiment to see how that turns out. So I'm using my Hunt 101, same nib that I used in the rock textures video, and Speedball ink, same ink, and the paper is also the same. So I've got the rock dome, I've got just a cliff face here, and now that I've kind of established that, I'm going to do the rocks, kind of a rock field here in the foreground. So when you're drawing a bunch of rocks lying together like this, a good rule of thumb is to start with the foreground and work your way back, because they're overlapping each other, at least mostly overlapping each other. And it's a heck of a lot easier if you start in the foreground and work backwards than vice versa. So that's what I'm doing here. Just a field of rocks. This might be like a riverbank, because these rocks are more or less rounded. All right, and they're just kind of right up against this rock dome that's sticking up out of the ground. It's one of my favorite things to do when I draw is create landscapes, because you can draw people. You can draw a warrior or something, and by himself it's a character study, but when you take a human and put them into an environment, now you're telling a story. You're telling a story not only of who this character is, but where is he in the world, or she. Who is this character? What are they doing? Where are they going? Where have they been? So it becomes, for me, a lot more interesting to put a character in an environment. which is really the elements of telling a story. Like they say, the main elements of telling a story is person plus place plus problem. You put those three elements together, a person in a place with a problem, and you have a story. So I'm not necessarily illustrating a problem, though you could, but I am putting a person in a place, and that's a big part of the story. So, got the basics of a scene here. Now I'm going to come up and I'm going to work on this person. And they're just standing up here on the rock. Got this little bag over their shoulder. Some sort of handle protruding. Let me zoom this in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. And the wind is blowing. Their cloak is kind of obscuring most of the foot over here. I want to create some interesting lines with this blowing cloak. Because I draw mostly with lines more so than cross-hatching, I do use cross-hatching, just sparingly. I like the lines to feel important. Like the lines have energy. A line has its own sort of energy that it portrays. So it's important for me to use every line and have it really be used to as much as it can be used. Like these lines in the blowing cloak, they are showing movement. It's showing the shape of the cloak, obviously, and maybe even a little of the texture, though not so much that. But what it's really doing is showing movement. Even though this figure is not moving, it's showing that there's wind, and that's adding to the environment. I could draw this cloak draping straight down, and that would add a different type of energy to this drawing. We've got this hood resting piled up here. And the character's hair is also blowing. Let's do some curved lines for this bag. Make that darker so that it's the underside, it's a shadowed part of this bag, but it's also going to separate it from the cloak because it's so much darker. Okay. Now this spear. All right. Got that person established. Now let's build the environment, or finish building the environment. So the rest of this drawing is just going to be rock textures. And these stones are, as I mentioned, mostly kind of smooth, water-worn. We know we're at the base of a cliff, so this might be an environment that's maybe a riverbed that sees a lot of action, flooding action over the years. So these rocks are all just weathered down, worn. And this person is perhaps traveling through Notice how if this figure wasn't here and we had no sense of scale, this could easily be a drawing of just some pebbles. So putting a person in this drawing really gives it a scale that you otherwise would have a hard time getting a feel for. come back and thicken these lines. I want a little bit more shadow here. I'm going to zoom back out. As I'm drawing, my eyes are always wandering over other parts of what I've done, and I go back to correct or add different things. In this case, I'm looking at the person thinking, well, I want a little more shadow. Okay. Got that off my chest. Yeah, no element of a drawing is safe from me until I'm done with the whole thing, because I'm always going back and changing. These little marks I'm making right now are kind of like moss or lichen growing on the rock. Notice that I'm using some of the techniques from that rock surface video that I did. I had a few different kinds of rocks on there, and I'm using some aspects of all of them in creating these rocks. And I'm really just taking my time. This is how I do a lot of my sketches. Like, you're really seeing me work the way that I normally work. I'm not doing anything different for for this video. And while I'm doing this, I will I'll just kind of get lost in the story. That's why my sketchbook work is so fun for me. It's kind of what I do to relax, because I'm not under any kind of pressure to produce anything specific for anybody. I do a lot of commission work, which I love to do, but there's nothing quite as freeing or as satisfying as just kicking back with the sketchbook and doing your own thing. And the pencil layout that I had when I initially started is kind of typical too of what I'll do. I'll just play around, make shapes with a pencil until something pops out at me and something takes my interest, and then I'll work with that shape as I'm thinking about stories or characters, and out pops a scene like this. I might start scribbling with the intent of drawing one thing, and it turns into something completely different. So here we are, building a world. That's what we're doing right now. We're building a world. These lines are all going to represent the curved surface, so I'm kind of running them all inward, following a similar dome shape as the outline of the rock. Time to clean the nib a little bit. Okay. So these rocks are closer, and I'm going to make the outlines thicker, because that is one of the ways to give the appearance of it being closer to you. Objects closer to you will seem larger, and the same thing goes subconsciously for lines. So you see a thicker line, you just tend to think, oh, closer to me. Kind of a way of not really forcing perspective, but it's kind of a perspective cheat. this is the part of the drawing that's a little monotonous, I suppose you could say. But in another sense, it's the most fun part because you can just let your mind wander and zone out while you ink all these rocks. You don't really have to think too hard about inking all these rocks. Once you've done a few of them, you sort of get into a flow. Like, okay, my hand knows what I'm doing now. So I'm thinking about where I want to put the moss, and how dark should it be versus the rest of the drawing. Let's just go through the rest of it here and deal with the outlines and the shadows. There, just a few of them anyway. Cliff face will be a little bit different. It might still be water worn, but it might only be water worn in the lower portion here. So we might be dealing with more rounded lines, curved lines down here versus more straight lines up here. Just a thought. Some idea to explore there. Just like the other rocks, this is zone out time. caught myself not talking, and that's not very interesting for you guys watching, so I gotta say something, right? I'll just keep rambling on about my process. So I'm thickening the lines down here to make shadow, of course. Right, and the rest of this will be lines running this direction. And when I'm done with this, I think I'm going to put a little frame around this, a little ink border to frame it up nice. Something that I do occasionally on sketches, and it's one way of turning a simple sketch into something that feels a little more, has a little more weight, a little more importance. I said I would run the rest of the lines that way, but I lied. I'm gonna do some more angled lines over here like this. All right. Now I'm going to take my bull nib. I think it's a 513 Hunt, something like that. Focus on it here. It does a good job at drawing nice consistent border lines. So I'm going to come down like this, and I'm going to come up to the rock here. Like that. Now let's do that along the top. I just loosely penciled these lines in earlier. Did not use a ruler, I'm just sort of eyeballing it. It looks straight maybe to you, but it's not straight. It's kind of straight, but that's all right. It's just a sketch. I'm one of those people that I've always preferred the imperfect line to the perfect line, so I don't use rulers too much. I only use rulers in a situation where an imperfectly straight line would look really weird. Otherwise, if I can get away with just a mostly straight line, then I'll just freehand it. And now the other side. Okay. There you can see how that changes the look of that drawing, and it turns it from kind of a loose, simple thing to all of a sudden it looks like it's got a little more importance to it just from drawing that border. So I'm going to clean this pen nib off and get back to the rocks. Just want to do a little bit more down here. And I'm also going to bring this rock face out more. Like that. And that just makes that scene pop a little bit by bringing this rock in front of that border that we just drew. So add a little more moss down here. Interesting lines. And there's a lot you could do to this scene to just keep building on it, add more to it. Such as we could put some clouds back here, either simple clouds or complex clouds. We could line the entire sky. And that's probably something, maybe I can make another video if I decide to go that route. This video is running a little bit long as it is, so I don't really want to dive into that at this time. But I think I've been able to at least give you a good sense of how I sketch and a little bit of the process. And I'd love to do more videos like this where I take you along for the ride as I draw something like this. But I do appreciate your support here on Patreon. I appreciate you watching the videos, commenting on them, and I look forward to making more videos like this in the future. So until the next video, I will see you guys later. Have a great day.